My husband told me he was taking a weekend trip with his college friends, leaving me alone to care for our 9-year-old son who had been mysteriously bedridden for 2 entire months. But the exact second his luxury SUV rolled out of our driveway, my pale, fragile son threw off his blankets, stood up on steady legs, and walked straight over to me. He grabbed my hand tightly and whispered, "Mom, we need to leave this house right now." I stared at him in pure shock, dropping my ceramic coffee mug, shattering it across the hardwood floor. Before I could even ask him what was going on, we heard a deafening crash. A heavy, battering ram was smashing against our solid oak front door, followed by aggressive male voices shouting, "Psychiatric Evaluation Unit, open this door immediately." My name is Natalie, and at 34 years old, I was about to discover the terrifying lengths a greedy man will go to when $41 million is on the line. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight back against a toxic partner who tried to destroy your reality. I did not freeze and I did not panic. When you spend 10 years building a medical technology startup from the ground up, you learn how to process crises in fractions of a second. I scooped up my son Leo, sprinting past the kitchen island and bursting through the fire door into the garage. I threw him into the passenger seat of my car, climbed behind the wheel, and slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. I did not bother waiting for the automatic garage door to open. The heavy steel reinforced bumper of my vehicle tore right through the fiberglass panels, sending shards of white debris flying into the morning air as we launched down the driveway and peeled out onto the suburban street. In the rearview mirror, I caught a fleeting glimpse of men in dark tactical gear swarming our front porch. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands remained perfectly steady on the leather steering wheel. We merged onto the interstate, putting miles between us and the nightmare that had just invaded our home. For the first 10 minutes, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the roar of the engine and the harsh rush of wind coming through the cracked window. I glanced over at Leo, expecting to see him crying or hyperventilating. Instead, my 9-year-old boy reached deep into the pocket of his flannel pajamas with trembling fingers. He pulled out a tiny black object. It was a digital micro-recorder, the kind journalists use to capture quiet conversations. I had bought it for him a year ago so he could record himself playing piano. He pressed the glowing green play button and held it up. The audio crackled for a second before my husband Jason's voice filled the silent cabin of the car. His tone was not the warm, charismatic pitch he used at neighborhood barbecues. It was a cold, vicious hiss that made my blood run instantly cold. "Listen to me very carefully, Leo. If you do not stay in that bed and act crazy when the doctors come, I am going to make sure they lock your mother in a mental asylum forever. You are going to tell them she forces you to stay in bed. You are going to cry and say she is hurting you. If you mess this up, she goes away in a straitjacket and you stay with me. The law is on my side, kid. Do not test me." The recording clicked off. A suffocating silence slammed into me, taking all the oxygen out of the car. I had to grip the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned entirely white just to keep the vehicle in a straight line. For 2 agonizing months, I had been taking Leo to countless pediatricians, neurologists, and specialists. I had spent sleepless nights crying by his bedside researching rare autoimmune diseases because he claimed he was too dizzy and weak to stand. I had stepped away from finalizing the massive buyout of my company just to nurse him. He was never sick. My brilliant, innocent little boy was never sick. Jason had been systematically torturing him, psychologically, breaking our child down to build a horrific narrative against me. Jason wanted everyone to believe I suffered from extreme Munchausen syndrome by proxy. He wanted the state to declare me legally insane and a severe danger to my own child. It was a perfectly calculated scheme to strip away my parental rights and completely eliminate my freedom. And the most terrifying part was that he had almost succeeded. If Leo had not found the courage to warn me, I would currently be strapped to a gurney in a psychiatric ward, stripped of my phone, my rights, and my voice. Jason thought his elaborate trap was flawless. He assumed my maternal desperation would blind me to his calculating moves. He was banking on my emotional exhaustion to make me an easy target for a forced institutionalization. But Jason made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot that I was the one who designed complex algorithms for a living. I built systems to detect microscopic anomalies, and now I was going to use every ounce of that analytical power to dismantle his entire life. I reached over and squeezed Leo's hand, telling him how brave he was for recording his father. We were completely alone on this highway with nothing but the clothes on our backs and a terrifying truth. But I knew exactly what I had to do next. The hunted was about to become the hunter. I took the next exit off the interstate, navigating my battered vehicle toward a desolate gas station, sitting on the dusty edge of the county line. The adrenaline that had fueled our escape was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a sharp, chilling reality. We needed untraceable communication. We needed supplies. I parked near the side of the convenience store, keeping the car out of direct view from the main road. I turned to Leo, who was clutching his seatbelt, his eyes wide and anxious. I told him to lock the doors the second I stepped out, and to hide on the floorboard if anyone approached. He simply nodded. Inside the brightly lit store, the air smelled of stale coffee and floor cleaner. I moved quickly down the aisles, grabbing 2 prepaid burner phones, a few charging cables, gallons of water, and a handful of protein bars. My mind was calculating our next moves like a chess grandmaster. I needed to call my corporate attorney, but I could not use my personal cell phone. Jason would undoubtedly have access to my call logs by now. I walked up to the counter and set the items down. The cashier, an older man who looked like he had been working a double shift, rang everything up without making eye contact. The total came to $140. I reached into my designer wallet and pulled out my heavy metal black card. It was tied directly to my primary private wealth account. I swiped it through the card reader. The machine processed for a few seconds before letting out a harsh, sharp beep. The screen flashed a bright red error message. Declined. I frowned, assuming it was a simple fraud alert triggered by an unusual purchase location. I quickly pulled out a secondary platinum credit card from a completely different bank and inserted the chip. The machine processed again and beeped even louder. Declined. The cashier finally looked up at me with a mixture of annoyance and pity. He let out a sigh and asked if I had another way to pay. My heart began to beat with a strange, irregular rhythm. I pulled out my cell phone and opened my encrypted email app. Right at the top of my inbox was an automated message from my private banking institution, sent just 20 minutes ago. The subject line was written in bold letters that seemed to burn the screen. Account suspension notice. I tapped the email and read the single devastating sentence. All associated accounts have been frozen, pending an emergency conservatorship order issued by the state family court. I stood there in the middle of that dingy gas station as the gravity of Jason's master plan finally crushed the remaining breath out of my lungs. He had not just called a psychiatric unit to have me committed. He had gone to a judge entirely behind my back. He had used the false medical records he created regarding Leo's fake illness to paint me as a deeply disturbed delusional woman suffering from extreme paranoia and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. He had convinced a court of law that I was a severe danger to my child and mentally unfit to manage my own life. But this was never really about my mental health. This was about the $41 million sitting in those accounts. Just 2 weeks ago, I had finalized the sale of my medical technology startup to a massive healthcare conglomerate. The buyout money had just cleared. Jason knew I was planning to file for divorce once the ink was dry on the corporate acquisition. Our marriage was already dead. Instead of fighting me for half the assets in a messy divorce trial, he decided to take everything. An emergency conservatorship meant Jason would be granted total, absolute legal control over my finances, my medical decisions, and my estate. If I was locked in a psychiatric facility, he would be free to drain every single cent of the $41 million while playing the role of the tragic, devoted husband caring for a sick child and a crazy wife. I apologized quietly, telling the cashier I would return with cash. I walked out into the cool morning air. The sheer evil of Jason's strategy was staggering. He had weaponized the legal system and the medical system simultaneously against me. He had effectively erased my existence with a single judge's signature. I was a millionaire on paper, but in reality I could not even buy a bottle of water for my son. I walked back to my car where Leo was hiding exactly as I had instructed. I opened the door and reached under my seat, pulling out a hidden envelope containing a few $100s in emergency cash. I was not defeated yet, but the game had escalated to a lethal level. I was not defeated yet, but the game had escalated to a lethal level. I climbed back into the driver's seat of my SUV and locked the doors. As I sat there gripping the steering wheel, a sudden horrifying thought struck me. Jason was meticulous. He had planned this entire conservatorship for months. He would never simply let me drive away without a failsafe. My background in technology made me hyper-aware of surveillance. I reached my hand underneath the steering column, running my fingers along the smooth plastic paneling and the exposed wiring harness. My heart stopped when my fingertips brushed against a small hard plastic square magnetically attached to the metal chassis. I yanked it free and held it up to the morning light. It was an active GPS tracking device with a blinking red indicator light. Jason was tracking our exact location in real time. He probably knew I was sitting at this exact gas station. Panic threatened to cloud my judgment, but I forced it down. If I destroyed the tracker right now, Jason would know I found it, and he would immediately alert the local authorities to expand their search radius. I had to use it to my advantage. I started the engine and pulled out of the gas station, merging back onto the highway. I asked Leo to search the Maps application on his tablet for the largest and most crowded shopping mall in the area. He pointed to a massive indoor commercial complex just 5 miles away. I pushed the SUV to its limits, weaving through traffic until we reached the sprawling multi-level parking garage of the shopping center. I drove all the way to the darkest corner of the third floor and parked between two large delivery vans. I left the GPS tracker exactly where it was safely tucked under the dashboard. Let Jason and his psychiatric team waste hours searching this massive mall. I grabbed Leo by the hand and we walked quickly down the concrete stairwell, exiting the garage into the busy surrounding streets. We needed transportation, but I could not rent a car using my frozen accounts, and I could not risk using any digital footprint. Fortunately, growing up entirely self-reliant had taught me to always have a backup plan. Before leaving the house, I had grabbed my favorite pair of custom running shoes. What Jason did not know was that the thick soles of these specific sneakers contained hollow hidden compartments. I knelt on the sidewalk, pretending to tie my laces, and carefully extracted 10 crisp $100 bills from each shoe, $2,000 in untraceable emergency cash. We walked a few blocks down a rundown commercial strip until we found a small, independent used car lot surrounded by a chain-link fence. A bored-looking salesman was sitting outside on a folding chair smoking a cigarette. I approached him directly and pointed to a faded gray 10-year-old sedan sitting in the back corner of the lot. I told him I needed a reliable engine, and I did not care about the peeling paint or the stained seats. I slapped $1,500 in cash on the hood of the car and told him I wanted the keys right now with no paperwork and no questions asked. He looked at the cash, looked at my desperate expression, and silently handed over the keys. It was not a luxury SUV, but it was entirely untraceable. Once we were safely inside the cramped, dusty sedan, I locked the doors and tore open the plastic packaging of the first prepaid burner phone. I powered it on and stared at the blank screen. I was a fugitive in my own city, completely cut off from my massive financial estate and hunted by a corrupt legal system. I needed a temporary safe haven to strategize and access my secure cloud servers. I needed someone who could vouch for my sanity and perhaps talk some sense into Jason. I scrolled through my memorized contacts and stopped on the only two people who might understand: Brandon and Simone. Brandon was Jason's younger brother. Unlike Jason, Brandon had always seemed grounded and reasonable. His wife Simone was a fiercely independent African-American woman who had always been vocal about family loyalty. We had hosted them for Thanksgiving dinner just last year, and Simone had frequently praised my success in the medical technology field. Surely they would see through Jason's insane fabrications. Surely they would realize that Leo was perfectly healthy and that this entire conservatorship was a massive fraudulent power grab. I dialed Brandon's number, praying he would answer. The phone rang 3 times before his familiar deep voice came through the speaker. I quickly explained that Jason had lost his mind, that he was trying to lock me in a psychiatric ward and steal my company buyout money. I begged him for help. Brandon sounded genuinely shocked and immediately told me to bring Leo to their private estate on the north side of the city. He promised that Simone was making up the guest room and that we would be completely safe there. A wave of immense relief washed over me. I thanked him profusely, hung up the burner phone, and put the old sedan into drive, heading straight for their mansion. I thought I was finally driving toward a safe sanctuary. I had no idea I was actually driving straight into the lion's den. The drive to the exclusive gated community where Brandon and Simone lived felt like a blur. I pulled my beat-up gray sedan up to the massive wrought iron security gates and punched in the visitor code Brandon had given me years ago. The gates slowly swung open, revealing a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured oak trees. Their estate was a sprawling modern glass and stone masterpiece that sat on 2 acres of prime real estate. As I parked my rusty car next to their dual luxury sports cars, a deep, unsettling feeling began to gnaw at the pit of my stomach. The silence of the neighborhood was deafening. Leo gripped my hand tightly as we walked up the sweeping slate steps to the grand double doors. I rang the doorbell, expecting to see Brandon's sympathetic face. Instead, the heavy door swung open to reveal Simone. She was standing there holding a crystal champagne flute, looking absolutely radiant. But there was no warmth in her eyes. There was only a cold, calculating amusement. She was dressed in a pristine white silk designer robe, but it was what she wore around her neck that made my breath catch in my throat. Resting heavily against her collarbone was my grandmother's vintage diamond necklace. It was a flawless platinum piece worth over $150,000. I kept it locked in a hidden biometric wall safe in my master bedroom. The only other person who knew the combination to that safe was Jason. I stared at the heavy diamonds catching the bright morning light, and then looked back up into Simone's perfectly contoured face. My voice was dangerously low and steady when I finally spoke. "That is my grandmother's necklace, Simone. Why is it around your neck?" Simone took a slow, deliberate sip of her expensive champagne and let out a dry, condescending laugh. She leaned against the heavy wooden doorframe, looking me up and down with absolute disgust, taking in my disheveled hair and cheap clothing. "Oh, Natalie, please do not start with the paranoid delusions right now. Jason warned us you were having a severe manic episode. You are going to the psych ward anyway, so what does it matter who wears the jewelry? You certainly cannot take it with you in a straitjacket. They do not allow sharp objects in the padded rooms." I felt the blood drain entirely from my face. I pulled Leo slightly behind me instinctively, shielding him from the venom in her voice. Brandon did not offer us sanctuary to protect us. He lured us here. They were all in on it. Every single one of them had conspired with my husband to destroy me. Simone stepped out onto the porch, her gaze dropping down to Leo, before snapping back up to me with a wicked smirk. "Besides, Jason made it very clear that the $41 million from your little startup is family money now. He is the conservator. He makes all the financial decisions for his sick, crazy wife. And as a family, we decided it was time to upgrade our lifestyle. Brandon and I just put a massive down payment on a gorgeous 90-foot yacht this morning using your cash. Consider it a tax on us for having to deal with your arrogant, successful attitude and insane drama all these years. Now we own everything you built." Her words hit me like physical blows. The betrayal was so absolute and so deeply calculated that it temporarily paralyzed my mind. They had not just stolen my money, They were actively celebrating my demise. Jason had bought their loyalty by freely distributing the wealth I had spent a decade building. My medical technology company was built on my sweat, my sleepless nights, and my intellect. Now my incredibly greedy sister-in-law was standing on her porch flaunting my family heirlooms and bragging about buying a yacht with my life's work. I took a slow, calculated step backward, keeping my eyes locked on Simone. I needed to get Leo back to the car immediately. But before I could even pivot on my heel, the heavy wooden front door swung open wider. Brandon stepped out onto the porch. He was not alone. Flanking him on either side were two massive men wearing matching black tactical polo shirts and heavy utility belts. They were private security contractors, the kind of ruthless mercenaries wealthy people hire to do their dirty work completely off the books. Brandon looked down at me with a chilling, empty expression lacking any brotherly love. I am sorry, Natalie, but Jason has the legal paperwork. He has the official court order. We cannot let you leave with the boy. It is for your own good. Just surrender quietly. The trap had officially snapped shut. I was standing on their porch with a disabled bank account, a hunted vehicle, and my terrified son hiding behind my legs. Two armed mercenaries were blocking the only exit from the property. They expected me to break down. They expected me to start screaming or crying or begging for mercy. They wanted me to act exactly like the hysterical, mentally unstable woman Jason claimed I was. But they had severely underestimated the psychological fortitude of a mother pushed to the absolute brink. I squeezed Leo's hand, let out a slow, controlled breath, and prepared to fight my way out of hell. Brandon stepped off the porch and slowly closed the distance between us, leaving the two massive security contractors blocking the driveway. He pulled out a folded stack of legal documents, holding them out with a chillingly calm demeanor. These are voluntary psychiatric commitment papers, Natalie. If you sign them right now and hand Leo over, we will ensure you get a comfortable private room at an upscale mental health facility. But if you make this difficult, these gentlemen will take the boy by force and you will be dragged out in handcuffs. The choice is yours. I stared at the papers, feeling a surge of pure, unfiltered rage replace the fear in my veins. They wanted me to sign away my freedom and hand over my son to his abuser. I knew I had to remain entirely calm, despite the terror. I looked Brandon dead in the eye, keeping my physical stance defensive in front of Leo. Why are you doing this? Jason is your brother, but you know exactly what he is. You know I am sane. How can you facilitate the destruction of my life? Brandon did not even flinch. His expression hardened into a look of deep-seated resentment. He lowered his voice so only I could hear the venom. Because you humiliated him, Natalie. For 10 years, Jason had to smile and play the supportive husband while you built your empire. You made the millions. You bought the house. Do you have any idea how emasculating it is for a man to watch his wife outshine him at every turn? You stripped Jason of his manhood by being the primary provider. You made him feel like a useless accessory. He deserves that $41 million for putting up with your relentless ambition and total lack of respect. His justification was so deeply rooted in toxic insecurity that it left me momentarily speechless. They were destroying my life and traumatizing an innocent 9-year-old boy simply because my financial success made my husband feel inadequate. Jason orchestrated a legal kidnapping and robbed me blind to repair his shattered masculine pride. And his brother was happily acting as the enforcer. Sign the papers, Natalie. Brandon demanded, his voice rising with impatience as he tapped the documents against his palm. Give us the boy and stop making this harder than it needs to be. I will never sign anything, and you will never touch my son. I spat the words out. Brandon let out a heavy sigh, shaking his head. He took a step back and gave a sharp nod to the two mercenaries. Take the boy from her right now. If she resists, physically restrain her until the transport unit arrives. The two massive men moved forward with terrifying speed. They were trained professionals entirely unbothered by the morality of the situation. I pushed Leo hard behind me, pressing his small frame against the side of my beat-up sedan. I screamed at him to stay behind my back, but the first contractor was already lunging forward. He reached out to violently shove me out of the way. The executive self-defense classes I had taken during my years of traveling alone suddenly kicked in. I dodged his heavy grabbing hand, pivoting sharply on my heel, and drove my right elbow violently into his exposed ribcage. He grunted in shock, stumbling back, but the second contractor immediately flanked me. He grabbed my arm, twisting it painfully up behind my back while driving his knee forcefully into my thigh. The blinding pain shot through my system, but I absolutely refused to go down. I kicked out wildly, trying to create distance. The first contractor recovered and shoved past my defensive stance, grabbing Leo by his small shoulders. My son screamed out in pure terror, thrashing against the mercenary. "Let him go!" I screamed, fighting viciously against the iron grip of the man pinning my arms. I watched in sheer horrific disbelief as Brandon stepped forward once again, holding the papers right up to my face. This was their ultimate leverage. They were going to traumatize my child right in front of my eyes, until my maternal instincts shattered completely, and I surrendered my signature. The physical pain in my twisted shoulder was nothing compared to the psychological agony of watching my boy cry out for his mother. I needed a massive distraction immediately before they threw him into the house. I looked frantically around the expansive driveway, searching for anything I could use to shift the balance of power. My eyes landed on the massive stone fire pit positioned on their expensive front patio. The outdoor structure was connected directly to the main gas line of the estate. A desperate, highly dangerous plan formed instantly in my mind. A desperate, highly dangerous plan formed instantly in my mind. I stopped pulling against the iron grip of the mercenary holding my arms, and instead let my body weight drop entirely, going completely limp. The sudden shift in momentum caught the massive contractor off guard. He stumbled forward just an inch, but that fraction of a second was all the leverage I needed. I violently twisted my torso, ripping my left arm free, and lunged toward the extravagant outdoor seating area, positioned just steps away on the patio. Resting on the marble outdoor coffee table was a silver ice bucket holding a magnum of vintage red wine that Brandon had proudly displayed for their morning celebration. It was a $5,000 bottle imported from France. I grabbed the heavy glass neck of the bottle with both hands. Brandon shouted a warning, lunging toward me, but he was too late. I swung the massive bottle with every ounce of strength I had left, smashing it directly against the sharp stone edge of the roaring gas fire pit. The heavy glass shattered instantly, sending jagged shrapnel flying across the patio. The highly alcoholic vintage wine poured directly into the open gas flames. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. A massive fireball erupted from the stone pit, shooting 10 feet into the air and licking the wooden beams of the expensive patio overhang. The sudden intense heat triggered the estate's state-of-the-art emergency fire suppression system. A deafening siren erupted from concealed speakers all around the property, blaring at an ear-splitting volume. Red emergency strobe lights began flashing wildly from the eaves of the mansion. A split second later, the automated sprinkler system activated. But these were not normal garden sprinklers. They were high-pressure industrial water jets designed to save a multi-million-dollar home. Torrents of freezing cold water blasted downward, instantly soaking everyone on the patio and creating a thick, blinding mist of smoke and steam as the water hit the raging gas fire. Total, absolute chaos swallowed the scene. Simone shrieked in horror as the freezing water ruined her silk robe and pelted the diamond necklace. She scrambled backward, slipping on the wet marble and crashing hard onto the patio furniture. Brandon threw his arms over his face, coughing violently as the thick black smoke from the burning alcohol surrounded him. The mercenary holding Leo instinctively let go with one hand to shield his eyes from the blinding high-pressure water and the sudden explosion. That was his fatal mistake. I did not hesitate. Moving purely on maternal instinct and adrenaline, I spun around and drove the heel of my heavy custom running shoe directly into the side of the mercenary's kneecap. I put my entire body weight into the strike. I felt the sickening crunch of cartilage giving way under my shoe. The massive man let out a guttural roar of agony, his leg buckling completely outward. He collapsed onto the wet driveway, clutching his knee. I grabbed Leo by his small waist, hoisting him up against my hip. "Hold on tightly and close your eyes," I screamed over the blaring siren. I did not run toward my beat-up sedan. The keys were still in the ignition, but the second mercenary was already recovering from the shock and blocking the path to the vehicle. Instead, I turned and sprinted blindly toward the side gate of the sprawling estate. The freezing water from the sprinklers felt like needles against my skin, but I ignored the cold. I kicked open the wooden side gate, tearing the hinges loose, and bolted into the massive backyard. Brandon and Simone's property backed up against a dense patch of protected municipal forestry. It was wild, unkept woods completely contrasting their manicured lawn. The sky above had darkened significantly as a sudden morning thunderstorm rolled in, mirroring the chaos below. Real heavy rain began to fall, mixing with the sprinkler water. I heard Brandon screaming furious orders behind me, telling the remaining guard to go after us. But the blaring alarm and the thick smoke masked our exit trajectory. I hit the edge of the tree line and did not slow down. Branches whipped against my face and tore at my clothes as I carried my 9-year-old son deep into the thick underbrush. The ground quickly turned to thick, slick mud under my shoes. My lungs burned with every desperate breath, and my arms ached from the weight of carrying Leo, but the sheer terror of what Jason had planned for us kept my legs moving. We ran until the massive glass mansion was completely swallowed by the dense trees, and the deafening fire alarm faded into a distant, muffled hum. I finally collapsed behind a massive fallen oak tree, lowering Leo safely onto a bed of damp leaves. I pulled him tightly against my chest, shielding him from the pouring rain. We were soaking wet, shivering in the middle of the woods, completely cut off from the world with no car and no immediate shelter. But as I looked down at my son's terrified but safe face, I knew I had won the first battle. They did not get him. I had successfully broken out of the lion's den. Now it was time to regroup, build my arsenal, and prepare to burn Jason's entire world to the ground. We rested behind that oak tree just long enough for our breathing to return to normal. The cold rain was relentless, soaking through our clothes and chilling us to the bone, but staying in the woods was not a long-term option. I stood up, pulling Leo with me, and carefully navigated us through the dense underbrush, heading away from the wealthy estates and toward the distant hum of a commercial highway. After a grueling 40-minute hike, we emerged from the tree line muddy and drenched, stepping onto the shoulder of a busy industrial road. I flagged down a passing city bus, paying the fare with damp dollar bills from my shoe. The heater on the bus provided a small comfort as we rode it all the way to the gritty outskirts of the city, far away from Jason and his hired mercenaries. We got off the bus in a rundown commercial district filled with neon signs and barred windows. This was the exact opposite of our suburban neighborhood, which was exactly why Jason would never look for us here. My first priority was getting us out of the elements and establishing a digital command center. We walked 2 blocks until I spotted the glowing yellow sign of a pawn shop. I pushed the heavy glass door open, the bell ringing loudly above us. The man behind the counter barely looked up from his phone as a soaking wet mother and child walked in. I went straight to the electronics section and found a bulky, outdated laptop that had definitely seen better days. It was perfect because it had no ties to my identity and no tracking software. I paid $200 in cash for the laptop and an extra $50 for a generic charger. On our way out, I stopped at a discount clothing store next door, buying us cheap dry sweatpants and oversized shirts to replace our ruined clothes. 3 blocks down the street sat a dilapidated motel with peeling paint and flickering exterior lights. The kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and did not ask for identification if you paid in cash. I walked into the lobby smelling the stale cigarette smoke and handed the clerk another $100 bill. He slid a physical brass key across the scratched counter, giving me room number 12 at the very back of the lot far from the main road. The room was cramped and smelled faintly of bleach, but the heavy deadbolt on the door clicked shut with a satisfying metallic thud. I immediately wedged a wooden chair under the doorknob for extra security. I helped Leo out of his wet, muddy clothes and into the dry sweatpants, tucking him into the worn bed sheets. He was completely exhausted from the physical and emotional trauma of the morning, falling asleep almost the second his head hit the flat pillow. I brushed his damp hair back from his forehead, feeling a renewed surge of cold, calculated determination. Jason had taken my home, my money, and my sense of security, but he had drastically underestimated my intelligence. I sat at the small, wobbly desk in the corner of the room and plugged the pawnshop laptop into the wall outlet. The machine whirred to life with a loud mechanical hum. The screen flickered before loading a basic operating system. I clicked on the network settings and found the motel Wi-Fi network. It was completely unsecured and painfully slow, but it was exactly what I needed. I connected to the network and immediately opened a web browser. I did not log into my personal email or any of my known social media accounts. Doing so would immediately ping Jason's tech team with my exact geographic location. Instead, I typed in a complex string of numbers, navigating to a hidden internet protocol address. This was the back door to my private encrypted cloud server. When I was building my medical technology company, I had designed a secondary, completely isolated data storage system to keep my most sensitive prototype blueprints safe from corporate espionage. Only I knew it existed. The screen prompted me for a two-factor biometric login, which I bypassed using a heavily encrypted master password I had memorized years ago. The server dashboard loaded, displaying rows of hidden digital files and video folders. I took a deep breath, rubbing my tired eyes as the progress bar slowly filled. 2 months ago, when Leo first started complaining about mysterious dizzy spells and extreme weakness, I had felt a deep, nagging suspicion. My maternal instinct told me something was fundamentally wrong, but the doctors could find zero biological causes. That was when I realized the illness might not be organic, it might be intentionally inflicted. Sitting in this cheap motel room, I was about to download the exact evidence I needed to completely destroy Jason. My career in the medical technology field was built entirely on observation. I spent the last decade designing non-invasive monitoring tools that allowed doctors to track patient vitals using microscopic optical sensors. I knew how to manufacture lenses so small they could fit inside the head of a standard sewing pin. 2 months ago, when the pediatric specialist kept telling me that Leo had no physical ailments, causing his sudden severe weakness, my maternal instincts began screaming that the threat was coming from inside our own house. Since Jason insisted on being the primary caregiver during the day, while I handled the final legal paperwork for my company buyout, I decided to conduct my own diagnostic test. I contacted a former supplier I deeply trusted and ordered a customized set of military-grade microcameras. They were completely undetectable and did not emit any infrared light electronic hum or wireless interference that could be picked up by standard household devices. One Tuesday afternoon, while Jason was playing golf at his country club, I went to work in Leo's bedroom. I carefully removed the dark glass eye of his favorite brown teddy bear sitting on the nightstand and replaced it with a high-definition lens. Then I climbed a step stool and unscrewed the metal grating of the air conditioning vent positioned directly above his bed, embedding a second camera deep inside the aluminum ductwork. Both devices were hardwired to a hidden battery pack inside the wall and programmed to upload encrypted footage directly to my isolated cloud server anytime they detected motion or hushed voices. I never told anyone about the cameras, not even my own son. I wanted pure, uncontaminated evidence of what was happening when I was out of the room. For weeks I had been too terrified to actually look at the footage, dreading what I might find. I was paralyzed by the fear that my husband, the man I had vowed to spend my life with, might actually be a monster. But sitting at that wobbly motel desk with the rain lashing against the thin glass window, I finally had no choice. I clicked on a master folder labeled Bedroom Feed and watched as dozens of high-resolution video thumbnails populated the screen. I organized the files chronologically, starting with the footage from just 3 weeks ago. I double-clicked the first video and leaned in close to the dim laptop screen. The footage was crystal clear, capturing the entire layout of Leo's bedroom in perfect lighting. I watched as the heavy wooden door creaked open and Jason walked in. He was holding a small plastic medicine cup in his right hand. Leo was sitting up in bed looking perfectly normal and healthy, playing a racing game on his tablet. The audio feed kicked in, picking up the distinct metallic click of Jason locking the bedroom door from the inside. My stomach twisted into a tight, painful knot as I listened to Jason speak. His voice was calm, but dripping with a sinister, absolute authority. He handed Leo the small plastic cup and told him to drink the liquid quickly. Leo hesitated, his small voice trembling as he asked his father what the medicine was for, because he did not feel sick at all. Jason leaned down, grabbing Leo roughly by the shoulder, his fingers digging into my son's skin. The camera, hidden in the ceiling vent, captured the cruel, cold expression on Jason's face perfectly. He told Leo that the medicine was to make him tired and that if he did not drink it immediately, his mother would be very angry with him. He was actively poisoning our child with heavy liquid sedatives and using my name as the primary threat. I sat in the dark motel room trembling with a mixture of profound heartbreak and explosive, absolute rage. Jason had been slowly breaking our son down physically and mentally, forcing him to consume unprescribed sleep aids to mimic the symptoms of a severe, debilitating neurological disorder. All of this was carefully orchestrated just so Jason could build a fabricated medical history to present to a judge. He was laying the groundwork for the emergency conservatorship step by sickening step. I had also placed a third micro camera in our master bedroom, discreetly embedded inside the digital alarm clock on Jason's nightstand. I had initially set it up to see if Jason was bringing Leo into our room during his supposed nighttime dizzy spells, while I was busy working late in my home office. I had completely forgotten about that third camera until I saw the massive file sizes sitting in the late-night motion alert folder. I clicked on a video file, time-stamped just 4 days ago, at 2 in the morning. The media player buffered for a fraction of a second before the crystal-clear 4K resolution video filled my screen. The night vision sensor automatically adjusted to the dark room, illuminating everything in a sharp monochrome glow. The heavy oak door of our master bedroom swung open, and Jason walked in. He was not alone. A tall woman in a sleek dark trench coat followed him inside, giggling softly. My chest tightened as I watched my husband pull her into a desperate embrace, right there at the foot of the bed I had shared with him for almost a decade. It was a sickening punch to the gut, but I forced myself to keep my eyes glued to the screen. I needed to know who she was. Jason helped her slip off the trench coat, revealing an expensive designer dress underneath. As she turned toward the nightstand to set down her wine glass, her face came perfectly into the high-definition frame of the hidden camera. My breath caught in my throat. I paused the video and leaned closer to the dusty screen of the pawnshop laptop, my mind racing to place her sharp, angular features and perfectly styled blonde hair. I had definitely seen her before. I opened a new tab on the browser and quickly logged into the county public records database using a dummy account. I searched for the emergency conservatorship order that Jason had weaponized to freeze my assets. I pulled up the digital copy of the court document and scrolled down to the bottom of the final page. There, staring back at me, was the bold black signature of the presiding official. The name printed below the signature line was Honorable Madeline Hayes, Substitute Family Court Judge. I quickly opened an image search for her name, and a dozen professional headshots populated the screen. I toggled back to the paused video feed comparing the images. It was a perfect match. The woman actively sleeping with my husband in my own house was the exact same judge who had signed the emergency order declaring me mentally unfit and stripping me of my $41 million estate. I hit play on the video again, my hands shaking not from sadness but from pure, unfiltered adrenaline. The affair was repulsive, but the conversation that followed was absolute gold. After their sickening encounter, the two of them lay in my bed, drinking my expensive wine and discussing their master plan. The audio feed picked up every single word with terrifying clarity. Jason laughed softly, stroking her hair, and asked if there would be any legal pushback when he drained the accounts. Madeline smiled a cold, calculating smile and told him there was zero risk. She bragged about how she had deliberately buried the conservatorship hearing on an emergency closed-door docket, ensuring no other legal counsel could review the fabricated medical records he had submitted. She explicitly told him that as long as he kept Leo properly sedated to maintain the illusion of illness, the state would grant him permanent control over the entire buyout fund. Then Jason leaned in, kissing her shoulder, and promised her a massive, untraceable offshore wire transfer the second the funds were cleared from my frozen accounts. This was not just a messy divorce anymore. This was not even just child abuse. This was a massive coordinated conspiracy involving a sitting judicial officer. It was extortion, judicial bribery, and federal wire fraud, all neatly documented on a secure cloud server. Jason thought he was the ultimate mastermind pulling the strings of the legal system to trap a helpless woman. But his arrogance had blinded him to his own extreme sloppiness. He had brought his co-conspirator right into the one room where they felt invincible, completely unaware that I had been watching them the entire time. I sat back in the creaky motel chair, the harsh glow of the laptop screen illuminating the dark room. Leo was still breathing softly in a deep sleep on the bed next to me, completely safe from the monsters who wanted to destroy him. Jason and Madeline thought they held all the cards. They thought my money bought them immunity, but they were about to learn that a brilliant, angry mother with unlimited resources is the most dangerous force on earth. I had everything I needed to burn their lives to the ground. Now I just had to figure out how to deliver the evidence to the right authorities without getting myself arrested by the corrupt local police force in the process. I stared at the dusty laptop screen, trying to map out a strategy that would expose the corrupt judge and my husband without landing me in a jail cell. The local police department was completely out of the question. If Judge Madeline Hayes had the power to quietly push through an emergency conservatorship without a single hearing, she absolutely had the power to intercept local police reports. If an ordinary patrol officer found me, they would not look at my evidence. They would simply see a mentally unstable fugitive and hand me over to the psychiatric transport unit. I needed an untouchable authority. Before I could even type a search query for the Regional Federal Bureau office, a harsh, piercing electronic screech shattered the silence of the tiny motel room. The sound was so loud I jumped back, knocking the wooden chair onto the stained carpet. The noise was not coming from the laptop. It was coming from the cheap prepaid burner phone resting on the nightstand next to my sleeping son. Leo stirred, groaning softly at the sudden disturbance. I scrambled across the room, grabbing the plastic phone and pressing the volume buttons to silence the alarm. The screen was brightly illuminated, displaying a stark, terrifying notification block. It was an emergency broadcast system alert sent to every cellular device in the state. I read the bold black text and felt my blood freeze. Amber Alert. Extreme danger. Be on the lookout for a 9-year-old boy named Leo, abducted by his non-custodial mother, Natalie. Suspect is suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia and is experiencing a violent manic episode. Child is critically ill and requires immediate life-saving medical intervention. Suspect is considered highly dangerous and unpredictable. Do not approach. Call 911 immediately. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. Jason had not just filed a police report. He had weaponized the entire state infrastructure against me. He had effectively put a bounty on my head, turning every single citizen with a smartphone into his own personal search party. I reached over and grabbed the plastic television remote from the nightstand. I pointed it at the bulky box television bolted to the motel dresser and pressed the power button, keeping the volume turned incredibly low. The screen flickered to life, tuning directly to the local news station. There, standing on the perfectly manicured front lawn of our suburban home, surrounded by a dozen microphones and camera crews, was Jason. He looked absolutely devastated. His hair was slightly disheveled, and he was not wearing his usual tailored suit. Instead, he wore a casual, wrinkled sweater, projecting the image of a broken, exhausted father. He was putting on an Oscar-worthy performance, crying real tears as he looked directly into the camera lens. "Please, Natalie, if you are watching this, please just bring our boy home," Jason pleaded, his voice cracking with perfect agonizing emotion. "I know you are confused right now. I know the illness is making you see things and believe things that are not real. But Leo is sick. You know he is sick. He needs his medication to survive. You are his mother, and I know deep down you love him. Do not let the sickness make you do something irreversible. Just come home, and I promise I will get you the professional help you desperately need. We love you, Natalie. Please do not hurt him." I stared at the television, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his manipulation. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. To the millions watching that broadcast, Jason was the ultimate tragic hero. He was a loving, devoted husband begging his severely mentally ill wife to spare their dying child. But I knew the horrifying truth. He was a monster speaking directly to me, threatening me on live television. When he said, "Do not let the sickness make you do something irreversible," he was not talking about my mental health. He was warning me not to release the cloud server evidence. He was telling me that if I tried to fight him, he would ensure the authorities used lethal force. I turned off the television, plunging the room back into silence. The situation had escalated to a massive public manhunt. I was the most wanted fugitive in the state. I could not step outside, buy food, or drive the rusty sedan without risking a random license plate check. Jason had effectively painted me into a corner, hoping I would break under the pressure and surrender myself. But as I looked at the pawnshop laptop, I realized his public stunt gave me the exact angle I needed. Jason used the media to escalate this into a high-profile kidnapping case. High-profile cases attract federal attention. I did not need a local police precinct. I just needed to send my evidence to the one agency designed to hunt down corrupt government officials. Finding a direct line to a federal agent who would actually listen to a wanted fugitive was not going to be easy. If I called the standard bureau tip line, the operators would immediately flag my name against the active Amber Alert and dispatch local police to my location. I needed to bypass the bureaucratic filter completely. I opened a secure browser window on the pawnshop laptop and began combing through recent federal press releases. I was looking for someone who specialized in taking down high-ranking public officials. After 20 minutes of intense searching, I found a name: Special Agent Carter. He was the lead investigator for the Regional Judicial Corruption Task Force. Just last year, he successfully dismantled a massive embezzlement ring involving 3 city councilmen. According to the articles, he was ruthless, meticulous, and entirely immune to local political pressure. He was exactly the weapon I needed. I could not just call his office and introduce myself. I had to give him something so explosive that he would have no choice but to take me seriously. I accessed my encrypted cloud server and opened the video file from the master bedroom. I used a basic editing tool to isolate a very specific 10-second window of the footage. It was the exact moment Jason pulled a heavy black canvas duffel bag from the bottom of my closet and tossed it onto the mattress next to Judge Madeline Hayes. The camera captured Jason unzipping the bag to reveal thick, meticulously banded stacks of $100 bills. He slid the bag across the expensive duvet directly into the lap of the judge. She looked down at the massive pile of illegal cash, let out a satisfied laugh, and nodded her head in clear agreement. It was textbook, irrefutable evidence of a felony bribe in crystal clear high definition. I created a new anonymous email account using a proxy server located in Europe to mask my digital footprint. I attached the 10-second video file and typed out a brief direct message. The subject line simply read, "Direct evidence of judicial bribery and federal wire fraud regarding Honorable Madeline Hayes." In the body of the email, I provided the exact date and time the footage was recorded. I stated that I had hours of additional evidence proving the conservatorship order was fraudulent. I found Agent Carter's direct federal email address listed on an archived interagency contact sheet and hit send. I watched the progress bar turn green, confirming the package had been delivered to the federal servers. Now I had to make the most dangerous phone call of my life. I picked up the plastic prepaid burner phone and dialed the direct office extension for Agent Carter. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered, stating his name and title. I took a sharp breath and forced my voice to remain perfectly steady. Agent Carter, my name is Natalie. I am currently the subject of a statewide Amber Alert, but I am not calling to surrender. I am calling to report a massive coordinated conspiracy involving my husband and a sitting family court judge. There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the immediate shift in his demeanor. I knew standard protocol dictated that he keep me talking long enough for his team to initiate a cellular trace. Natalie, he started, his tone careful and measured. You are in a lot of trouble right now. The best thing you can do for your son is to tell me exactly where you are. I cut him off immediately, refusing to let him control the narrative. I am not crazy, Agent Carter, and my son is perfectly safe. My husband orchestrated this entire public manhunt to cover up the fact that he is stealing $41 million from my private accounts. I just sent an encrypted video file to your direct federal email address. Open it right now. I heard the faint clicking of a computer mouse in the background. A few seconds later, the sound of a heavy breath exhaling sharply through the phone speaker told me everything I needed to know. He was watching the judge accept the cash. The silence that followed was entirely different from the first. It was not the silence of a law enforcement officer trying to trap a fugitive. It was the silence of an investigator who just struck absolute gold. When he finally spoke again, his voice had lost all the patronizing caution. He sounded sharp, intensely focused, and ready to work. Okay, Natalie, he said quietly. You have my full attention. Tell me everything. I spent the next 40 minutes detailing Jason's master plan to Special Agent Carter. I explained the forced sedatives, the fabricated medical history, the fake conservatorship, and the violent kidnapping attempt. Carter listened without interrupting, taking rapid notes. When I finished explaining how Jason planned to drain my buyout fund, the line went quiet again. Listen carefully, Natalie Carter finally said. The video you sent me is explosive, but you need to understand how the corrupt legal system works here. Judge Madeline Hayes is heavily insulated. She has powerful friends in the local police department. If we just hand this to a local prosecutor, her defense attorneys will claim the money was a legitimate real estate deposit. They will bury the case in endless administrative hearings until the public forgets about it. Are you telling me a video of my husband bribing a sitting judge is not enough to arrest them right now? I asked, gripping the phone. It is not enough to put them away forever, Carter replied sharply. We do not just want a slap on the wrist. We want federal wire fraud. We want judicial extortion. We want criminal conspiracy with 25-year mandatory minimum sentences for everyone involved. To get an airtight federal conviction, we need them to hang themselves. We need Jason and Judge Hayes to commit undeniable perjury on the official public court record. Carter laid out a strategy that was absolutely terrifying. Judge Hayes had scheduled a final emergency custody and asset forfeiture hearing for tomorrow morning at 9. The purpose of the hearing was to permanently strip me of my parental rights and legally transfer total control of my estate to Jason in absentia, since I was a wanted fugitive. Carter explained that if Jason submitted the forged medical documents into evidence and lied under oath, while the judge officially stamped the fraudulent transfer of funds, they would both trigger federal wire fraud statutes. The second her gavel hit the wood, the trap would snap shut permanently. But there is a catch, Natalie Carter warned. For this sting operation to work, you cannot just hide in that motel room. If you do not show up, they will process the paperwork behind closed doors, making it incredibly difficult for my team to subpoena the documents. You have to force them into an open courtroom. You have to walk directly into that hearing tomorrow morning and face the exact people who are trying to destroy you. A cold chill ran down my spine. There is an active Amber Alert for my arrest, Agent Carter. The second I step through those metal detectors, the local bailiffs will put me in handcuffs and drag me straight to a psychiatric ward. Jason will take Leo. You will not be alone, Carter assured me. I am mobilizing my corruption task force right now. I will have undercover federal agents positioned inside the courtroom. But you need to bring your own legal representation to force the hearing open. Do you have a lawyer who is absolutely ruthless and completely outside of Judge Hayes's local circle of influence? I immediately thought of my lead corporate attorney, the man who had negotiated my $41 million buyout against teams of aggressive Wall Street bankers. He was a legal shark who feared absolutely no one. His name was Harrison, and he despised local courtroom politics more than anything. I knew he would drop everything to destroy a corrupt judge. I told Carter I had the perfect man for the job. Good, Carter said. Call him right now and tell him to meet you at the courthouse steps tomorrow morning. Keep Leo safe tonight. Tomorrow you are going to walk right into the lion's den, and we are going to burn it to the ground. He hung up the phone, leaving me in the dimly lit motel room. The stakes had never been higher. I looked over at my sleeping son, knowing that if this failed, I would lose everything. I looked down at the baggy sweatpants I was wearing. Jason wanted the world to see a hysterical broken woman suffering from a severe manic episode. I was not going to give him that satisfaction. I needed to look like a successful tech founder ready to reclaim her empire. I made a mental note to take my remaining cash to a high-end boutique the second they opened. I picked up the burner phone, dialed my attorney, and prepared for war. Tomorrow morning, Jason and Madeline Hayes were going to realize they picked a fight with the wrong mother. Tomorrow morning arrived with a cold gray sky that perfectly matched my hardened resolve. At exactly 7, I used my last few $100s at a high-end boutique. I needed to shed the visual identity of a terrified victim. I purchased a sharp-tailored charcoal gray suit and a crisp white silk blouse. I pulled my hair back into a severe tight bun, hiding any trace of the exhausted woman who had spent the night hiding in a cheap motel. I arranged for a trusted private security firm, paid directly through Harrison's corporate retainer, to guard Leo at an undisclosed, secure location. My son was completely safe. Now it was time for me to walk directly into the fire. Harrison met me at the base of the massive concrete steps of the county courthouse. He was a tall, imposing man, with slicked-back silver hair, and a terrifying reputation for financially ruining anyone who crossed his clients. He handed me a thick leather briefcase and gave me a sharp, confident nod. He had already communicated with Special Agent Carter. The trap was set, and the undercover federal agents were already inside the building. We bypassed the standard security line using Harrison's premium legal credentials and marched directly toward the heavy mahogany doors of courtroom number 4. Inside the chamber, the atmosphere was sickeningly somber. I could see the scene perfectly through the small rectangular glass windows in the double doors. Judge Madeline Hayes was sitting high on her elevated wooden bench, wearing her black judicial robe, trying to look completely impartial and deeply concerned. In the front row of the gallery sat my husband, Jason. He was leaning forward, burying his face in his hands, putting on a spectacular performance of a grieving, devastated father. Sitting right beside him were his eager accomplices. Brandon had his arm wrapped tightly around Jason's shoulder, playing the highly supportive brother. Simone sat on Jason's other side, dabbing her completely dry eyes with a tissue. She was wearing an expensive black designer dress, and to my absolute disgust, she was still wearing my grandmother's $150,000 diamond necklace. The court reporter was typing rapidly as Jason's newly hired attorney, a sleazy local lawyer known for handling quiet backroom deals, stood at the podium. I could faintly hear his voice echoing through the chamber as he outlined the fabricated horrors of my mental state. He told the court that I was an active fugitive, a severe danger to society, and that my complete absence today was the absolute final proof of my insanity. He formally requested that the judge grant Jason permanent emergency custody and immediate irrevocable control over the $41 million medical technology buyout fund. Judge Hayes picked up her heavy wooden gavel. She looked down at Jason with a perfectly rehearsed expression of deep, profound sympathy. She announced to the silent room that given the severe circumstances and the extreme danger to the child, the court was fully prepared to grant the motion in absentia. She raised the gavel high into the air, preparing to strike the block and finalize the theft of my entire life. That was my exact cue. I did not just gently push the doors open. I shoved the heavy mahogany double doors apart so forcefully that the solid brass handles slammed loudly against the interior wood paneling. The sharp, deafening crack echoed like a gunshot through the silent courtroom. Every single head in the room snapped around to look at the back of the aisle. The gavel froze completely in midair. Judge Hayes's perfectly constructed mask of judicial sympathy vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Jason whipped around in his seat, and all the fake healthy color drained entirely from his face. He looked as if he had just been struck by lightning. Brandon shot up from his chair, his jaw dropping wide open, while Simone actually let out a loud, dramatic gasp, her hand flying up to clutch my stolen diamonds tightly at her throat. I stood at the back of the courtroom, completely motionless for 2 long, agonizing seconds, letting the reality of my absolute presence suffocate them. I was not wearing a straitjacket. I was not screaming or crying or acting like a paranoid schizophrenic. I looked exactly like the brilliant, ruthless chief executive officer who had built an empire from the ground up. Beside me, Harrison adjusted his expensive silk tie and stepped powerfully forward. We walked down the center aisle together, our hard leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. The sound was like the ticking of a bomb countdown. The bailiffs stood up tensely, gripping their radios, unsure of how to handle an Amber Alert fugitive who was casually strolling into court with the most expensive lawyer in the state. I did not look at the bailiffs. I did not look at the confused gallery. I locked my eyes directly onto my husband and the corrupt judge he was sleeping with. I had walked straight into their perfect trap. Now it was time to let the heavy iron jaws of the federal government snap entirely shut around them. Bailiffs, arrest that woman immediately. The voice of Judge Madeline Hayes cracked like a whip across the tense courtroom, breaking the suffocating silence. She pointed a shaking finger directly at me. She is a wanted fugitive under an active Amber Alert. Remove her from my courtroom. 2 armed bailiffs quickly stepped toward me. I did not flinch. I stood perfectly still, keeping my chin raised high. Before they could even close the distance, Harrison stepped directly into their path, raising his leather briefcase like a protective shield. "You will do absolutely no such thing!" Harrison projected his powerful voice loudly across the room. His tone carried absolute authority. "My client is not a fugitive. She is a mother who has voluntarily appeared before this court to aggressively challenge a fraudulent ex parte conservatorship order. We are officially placing ourselves on the record, Your Honor, and we demand an immediate evidentiary hearing before any custodial action is taken." Judge Hayes gripped her gavel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her eyes darted frantically toward Jason, who looked completely paralyzed in his seat. She knew she was cornered. Ordering my arrest without allowing Harrison to speak on the official court record constituted a massive violation of due process, leaving her vulnerable to an immediate appellate review. She needed this sealed quietly, and Harrison was forcing it. She swallowed hard, her jaw clenching in fury. "The Amber Alert stands, Counselor," Judge Hayes hissed, leaning over her heavy wooden bench. "However, since your client has recklessly endangered her child to appear here, I will allow you exactly 10 minutes to argue why I should not finalize this asset forfeiture and strip her of all parental rights permanently. Call your first witness." His attorney shoved him toward the witness stand. Jason walked up the short wooden steps, keeping his head bowed in manufactured sorrow. He placed his hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Every word he was about to speak was a calculated lie, and the undercover federal agents sitting quietly in the back rows were recording it all. Jason sat down and immediately looked at me with fake pity. The gaslighting began the second he opened his mouth. His attorney asked him to explain why he sought the emergency order. Jason let out a shaky breath, wiping a non-existent tear from his cheek. My wife is deeply unwell, Jason said, his voice vibrating with feigned emotion. For the past 2 months, she has been suffering from severe paranoid delusions. She believes people are constantly watching her. She stopped sleeping and eating. And worst of all, she began projecting her sickness onto our 9-year-old son, Leo. She convinced herself he was dying of a mysterious neurological disease when in reality, he was perfectly healthy. She subjected him to endless unnecessary medical procedures. His attorney dramatically approached the bench, handing a thick manila folder to Judge Hayes and a copy to Harrison. I have here a comprehensive psychiatric evaluation signed by 3 independent medical professionals. The attorney announced loudly for the gallery to hear. These records confirm that Natalie suffers from acute schizophrenia and Munchausen syndrome by proxy. She is a severe active danger to society and specifically to her own child. Harrison slowly opened the file. I leaned over slightly to look at the documents. They were flawless forgeries. The letterheads, the medical jargon, and the forged signatures of doctors I had never even met were terrifyingly accurate. Jason had used the $41 million buyout as collateral to purchase top-tier fabricated medical records from corrupt professionals in his network. Jason continued his testimony, painting a horrific picture of my supposed insanity. He described in graphic, fabricated detail how I allegedly locked Leo in his room, how I screamed at invisible enemies in the hallway, and how my sudden departure yesterday was a violent psychotic break. He claimed that the only way to save Leo and protect the family assets from being squandered in a manic episode was to grant him total, irrevocable control over the medical technology buyout fund. I sat there listening to the man I once loved assassinate my character with surgical precision. He was so convincing that the court reporter was looking at me with genuine fear. Brandon and Simone were nodding along in the front row, validating every single lie. Jason thought he was delivering the final fatal blow to my credibility. He thought these forged papers were the ultimate shield. He had absolutely no idea that Harrison was currently holding a flash drive containing the exact video footage that would send them all to federal prison for the rest of their natural lives. Your Honor, I have no further questions for my client at this time, Jason's attorney announced, taking his seat with a smug, satisfied grin. He truly believed he had just handed the judge the perfect excuse to close the case and secure the millions. Harrison did not wait for the judge to speak. He stepped right up to the center podium, resting his heavy leather briefcase on the solid wooden stand. He held the small, sleek silver flash drive high in the air so the entire room could see it clearly. Your Honor, since we are now officially on the record conducting an evidentiary hearing regarding the severe danger to my client's child, I have an exhibit that must be entered into evidence immediately. Harrison declared, his voice completely devoid of any emotion. Judge Hayes scowled, leaning sharply forward over the bench. Counselor, you cannot simply introduce surprise exhibits without proper discovery. I will not allow it. Harrison did not back down an inch. The petitioner just submitted surprise medical evaluations, claiming my client is actively abusing her son. I am submitting direct time-stamped video evidence of the child's actual living conditions from inside the marital home. If this court is truly concerned with the physical safety of Leo, it is legally obligated to review this footage right now. Denying this exhibit while readily accepting unverified medical records would be a catastrophic procedural error. Judge Hayes swallowed hard. She looked over at Jason, who shrugged, looking slightly confused, but still arrogantly confident. He had swept the house for hidden microphones months ago and found absolutely nothing. He thought he was untouchable. Judge Hayes reluctantly nodded, gesturing toward the bailiff to assist with the audio-visual equipment. Harrison walked over to the court clerk's desk and firmly plugged the silver flash drive into the courtroom computer terminal. He bypassed the standard presentation software and opened the raw video file directly. High above the jury box and mounted directly behind the witness stand, the massive flat-screen monitors flickered to life. The courtroom fell dead silent. Every single pair of eyes was glued to the glowing screens. The video began playing in crystal clear high definition. It showed the entire layout of Leo's bedroom, illuminated perfectly by the afternoon sun. The digital timestamp displayed a date from exactly 3 weeks ago. Jason was sitting in the witness box watching the screen. I saw the exact second his brain processed the specific camera angle. He realized the footage was being recorded from high up inside the air conditioning vent. The arrogant, healthy color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, terrified ghost. He opened his mouth to object, but no sound came out. On the massive monitors, the heavy bedroom door creaked open. The digital version of Jason walked into the room holding the small plastic medicine cup. The courtroom surround sound speakers crackled slightly before broadcasting the audio with terrifying clarity. "Drink this right now, Leo." The digital Jason commanded, his voice cold and menacing, echoing off the mahogany walls of the courtroom. The real Jason physically flinched in the witness stand as his own cruel voice condemned him. In the gallery, several people gasped loudly. The sleazy attorney who had just aggressively defended Jason pushed his chair back from the defense table, staring at the screen in absolute unadulterated horror. On the video, Leo whimpered, asking his father why he had to take the medicine when he did not feel sick at all. The courtroom watched in stunned silence as Jason leaned over the bed, grabbing the 9-year-old boy violently by the shoulder. His large fingers dug deeply into the child's skin. "If you do not drink this to make yourself tired, your mother is going to be very angry," Jason hissed on the screen. The threat was vile. The manipulation was completely disgusting. He was actively forcing heavy, unprescribed sedatives down a perfectly healthy child's throat. A collective wave of disgust washed over the entire room. The court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering frozen over her machine. Simone dropped her hand from my diamond necklace, her jaw hanging wide open. Brandon looked physically sick, staring at the brother he had just helped commit a violent kidnapping attempt. Harrison let the video play out entirely, showing Jason locking the door and standing over the boy until the cup was empty. When the clip finally ended, Harrison hit a button, freezing the final frame of Jason's scowling face on the massive screens. Harrison slowly turned away from the monitors and walked directly toward the witness box. He leaned against the wooden railing, trapping Jason with his intense stare. "Is that your voice on the recording, Jason?" Harrison asked, his tone dangerously quiet. "Is that your hand violently gripping the shoulder of a 9-year-old boy? Is that you forcing heavy sedatives into a healthy child to artificially induce the symptoms of a neurological disorder, just so you could fabricate a medical history today?" Jason was actively hyperventilating. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for an escape. He looked at his attorney, but the man was violently shaking his head, refusing to make any eye contact. He looked desperately up at Judge Hayes. "Your Honor, you have to stop this," Jason stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched panic. "That video is a deep fake. She works in technology. She fabricated that entire video to frame me." Harrison smiled a cold, shark-like smile. "A deep fake," Harrison repeated loudly. "That is a very interesting defense for a man currently sitting under oath. But if you want to claim my client is fabricating videos of your daily activities inside that house, let us look at the next piece of evidence. Because the camera in Leo's bedroom was not the only one she installed." Harrison turned back to the court clerk's computer terminal and pressed the spacebar. The massive screens above the jury box went completely black for a fraction of a second before the next file loaded. The high-definition night vision sensor kicked in, illuminating the familiar layout of my master bedroom in a sharp monochrome green glow. The timestamp in the corner indicated the footage was recorded just 4 days ago at 2 in the morning. In the witness box, Jason let out a strangled, horrific gasp. He finally realized exactly what camera angle was playing. He lunged forward, trying to stand up, but his legs seemed to give out beneath him, causing him to slump heavily back into the wooden chair. On the screens, the heavy oak door of the master bedroom swung open. The digital version of Jason walked into the room. A second later, a tall woman wearing a sleek, dark trench coat followed him inside, giggling softly. The courtroom was so quiet, you could hear the subtle hum of the air conditioning vents. Everyone watched in morbid fascination as Jason helped the woman slip off her coat. She turned toward the nightstand to set down her wineglass, and her face came perfectly into the high-definition frame. A massive collective shockwave ripped through the gallery. It was not just a random woman. The sharp, angular features and perfectly styled blonde hair belonged to the very same woman currently sitting on the elevated wooden bench overseeing this entire case. It was Honorable Madeline Hayes, substitute family court judge. Up on the bench, Judge Hayes physically recoiled as if she had been slapped. All her false judicial authority evaporated instantly. Her skin turned an ash-gray color, and her eyes widened in sheer terror. The heavy wooden gavel she had been clutching slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the sound block with a loud, sharp crack before rolling off the edge of the desk and clattering heavily onto the floor. She opened her mouth to order the screens shut off, but she was completely paralyzed by the sight of her own corruption being broadcast to the room. The audio feed was ruthless. The courtroom listened in stunned horror as Jason and the judge lay in my bed, casually discussing how to steal my life. Jason asked if there would be any legal pushback when he drained the accounts. The digital version of Judge Hayes laughed a cold, calculating laugh. She explicitly promised him that she had buried the conservatorship hearing on an emergency closed-door docket. She assured him that no other legal counsel could review the fabricated medical records and that the state would grant him permanent control over the entire buyout fund. But Harrison was not finished. He let the video play out to the ultimate climax. On the screens, Jason walked over to the closet and pulled out a heavy black canvas duffel bag. He tossed it onto the mattress next to the judge. He unzipped the bag, revealing thick, meticulously banded stacks of $100 bills. He slid the bag directly into the lap of the corrupt judge, who looked down at the massive pile of illegal cash and nodded her head in clear agreement. Absolute pandemonium erupted inside the courtroom. People in the gallery began shouting. Jason's own brother Brandon jumped up from his seat, looking frantically toward the courtroom exit, realizing they were all going to prison. Simone buried her face in her hands, completely sobbing, recognizing that her luxurious yacht was bought with blood money tied directly to a federal crime. At the defense table, Jason's sleazy attorney practically vaulted out of his chair. He shoved his legal pads into his briefcase, with shaking hands backing away from Jason. He knew that being closely attached to a massive judicial bribery case would instantly end his long career and permanently cost him his law license. "I am withdrawing as counsel immediately," he shouted over the noise, raising his hands. "I had absolutely no prior knowledge of this transaction." "Bailiff, turn off that screen immediately." Judge Hayes finally found her voice, screaming hysterically over the chaos. "This court is adjourned. Clear the room." But absolutely nobody moved to follow her desperate orders. The bailiff stood frozen, staring up at the screen. They were local county officers who had just watched their direct superior blatantly commit a massive felony on camera. They had no idea who was actually in charge of the room anymore. Harrison stood perfectly calm and resolute amidst the screaming and the absolute chaos. "You cannot adjourn this court, Your Honor." He projected his powerful voice, cutting right through the pandemonium. "You are no longer acting in a judicial capacity. You are an active participant in a criminal conspiracy." Harrison's words hung in the air like a physical weight. Judge Madeline Hayes sank back into her high leather chair, completely defeated. Her eyes darted toward the side exit, but the bailiffs were now standing firmly in front of the heavy wooden doors, not to protect her, but to secure the room. The local court officers had finally realized the severe gravity of the situation. Absolutely nobody was leaving this chamber. Down in the witness box, Jason underwent a terrifying transformation. The entire courtroom watched as the facade of the weeping, devoted father completely dissolved. The fake tears dried up instantly. His posture shifted from a slumped, grieving man to a rigidly aggressive, cornered animal. He looked up at the massive monitors, still frozen on the image of him handing a bag of illicit cash to the corrupt judge. He realized with absolute certainty that his custody battle was entirely dead. He realized he was never going to legally lock me in a psychiatric facility. But instead of showing remorse or begging for forgiveness, Jason let his true nature take complete control. His pure, unadulterated greed completely overshadowed his fear of prison. He abruptly stood up in the witness box, gripping the wooden railing so tightly his knuckles turned stark white. His face twisted into a mask of furious arrogance. "Fine," Jason screamed, his voice echoing harshly across the paralyzed courtroom. "You want to play the victim, Natalie. You want to pretend you are a perfect mother while I am the villain. It does not matter. None of this matters." He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, his eyes bulging with a desperate, manic energy. "You can keep the kid. I never wanted him anyway. He was just a pawn to make the paperwork look legitimate. But you are not getting the money. The medical technology buyout happened while we were legally married. Every single cent of that $41 million is marital property under state law. You built that company during our marriage. That means half of it belongs to me by default. Because my name is on the primary joint wealth accounts, I had full legal authorization to access the funds." Jason let out a loud, erratic laugh that sounded entirely unhinged. "You think you are so smart with your hidden cameras and your expensive corporate lawyer? But you are too late, Natalie. I did not just bribe a judge and buy a yacht. The second the emergency conservatorship order was signed, I authorized massive international wire transfers. I drained the primary accounts this morning before I even walked into this courthouse. The funds are already gone. They are sitting in offshore holding accounts under a dozen different shell companies that you will never be able to trace. You might have the video, but I have the $41 million. The sheer audacity of his confession sent another massive shockwave through the gallery. He had just publicly admitted to using a child as a pawn and transferring tens of millions of dollars out of the country. Brandon, who was still sitting in the front row, buried his face in his hands, groaning loudly in despair. His brother was actively confessing to massive financial crimes on the official court record. Simone looked up, her eyes wide with sudden, frantic hope. She clung to my grandmother's diamond necklace, believing that if the money was safely hidden offshore, she might still keep her luxurious new lifestyle. I stood next to Harrison and listened to Jason scream about his ultimate financial victory. I did not feel a single ounce of panic. I did not feel the crushing devastation Jason was desperately hoping to see on my face. Instead, I felt a cold, sharp sense of absolute satisfaction. I looked at the man I had spent a decade of my life with. I looked at his sweaty red face, his erratic breathing, and his pathetic, desperate greed. He had traded his own flesh and blood for the illusion of wealth. Harrison did not interrupt Jason. He let my husband rant on the official court record, ensuring the reporter documented every single arrogant admission of guilt. When Jason finally ran out of breath, he stood there panting, glaring at me with a triumphant, hateful smirk. He truly believed he had outsmarted the system. He truly believed that no matter what happened next, he was a multimillionaire. The courtroom was dead silent once again, waiting for our reaction. Everyone expected Harrison to panic. They expected me to break down crying over the loss of my entire life's work. They had absolutely no idea that I had been 3 steps ahead of Jason from the very beginning. I stepped away from my attorney and walked slowly toward the center podium. I looked directly into Jason's manic eyes, preparing to deliver the financial death blow that would shatter his reality into a million unrecoverable pieces. I reached out and pulled the small black microphone on the podium slightly closer to my mouth. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to scream to be heard in a room that had gone completely still. "You did not wire anything, Jason," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the courtroom speakers. Jason blinked, his face twisting in sudden confusion. He opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off immediately. 3 months ago, I caught you secretly trying to forge my signature. You were trying to change the primary beneficiary on my comprehensive life insurance policy, removing Leo and naming yourself as the sole recipient. You thought I was too busy finalizing the corporate buyout to notice the paperwork discrepancy. But you forgot that I read every single line of every single contract I sign. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. The implication was terrifying. Jason was not just planning to steal my money and lock me in an asylum. He was actively preparing to profit if I suddenly died. That was the moment I realized you were planning something catastrophic. I continued holding his terrified gaze. So before the $41 million buyout funds even cleared the escrow phase, I took drastic permanent action. I hired a specialized corporate wealth management firm in New York. I legally moved the entire $41 million into a blind, irrevocable trust established under the highly protective financial laws of the state of Delaware. Jason gripped the wooden railing, his knuckles completely white. "That is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I saw the balances. I logged into our joint wealth accounts this morning, and I transferred the money." I smiled a cold, empty smile that made him physically recoil. "You logged into a mirrored dummy account, Jason. It was a perfectly replicated digital portal set up by my forensic accountant. It was designed to look exactly like a high-yield private wealth account, but it contained absolutely nothing but digital ghosts. It was a honeypot designed to track your exact internet protocol address and monitor your illegal wire attempts." I paused, letting the absolute reality of his failure wash over him. Once assets are legally transferred into an irrevocable trust, the original owner permanently surrenders all legal rights to that capital. The money becomes its own protected legal entity. Do you understand what that means, Jason? I do not own that $41 million anymore. And because I do not own it, it is absolutely not marital property. Jason was violently shaking his head, refusing to accept the death of his empire. "No," he whispered, staring at me with hollow, panicked eyes. "The sole beneficiary of that trust is our 9-year-old son, Leo." I stated, my voice ringing with undeniable finality. "The managing trustee is a massive federally chartered bank that will absolutely never authorize a withdrawal without my son turning 18 years old. You spent months torturing our child, forging medical records, and sleeping with a corrupt judge just to steal a massive fortune that legally ceased to exist 3 months ago. You destroyed your entire life for absolutely nothing." The total absolute destruction of his master plan hit Jason like a physical freight train. His legs finally gave out completely, and he collapsed back into the wooden witness chair. He stared blankly at the mahogany wall, his mouth opening and closing without a single sound coming out. In the front row, Simone let out a sharp, hysterical sob. She suddenly realized the horrifying truth. Brandon reached out to grab her arm, but she violently slapped his hand away, her eyes wide with sudden, frantic panic. "Wait!" Simone shrieked, standing up and pointing a trembling, manicured finger at Jason. If the money in that joint account was entirely fake, then what did Jason use to secure the massive down payment for our luxury yacht this morning? What did he use to pay the yacht brokers? And where did he get the bag of cash for the judge? Harrison stepped forward back to the microphone, a lethal grin spreading across his face. "That is an excellent question, Simone," he announced to the courtroom. If Jason could not access the $41 million, he had to find another way to fund his criminal enterprise. My client essentially laid out a digital trap, and your brother-in-law walked right into it. To get the physical cash for the bribe and the digital proof of funds for the yacht, Jason had to leverage the only tangible assets he thought he still controlled. The entire room hung on Harrison's every word as he prepared to deliver the final legal execution. Jason looked up from the witness chair, his face entirely devoid of blood, finally realizing the ultimate catastrophic mistake he had made in his desperate blind greed. Harrison stepped back, allowing me to reclaim the microphone. I looked down at Jason, who was now trembling uncontrollably in the wooden witness chair. His eyes were wide with a new, profound kind of terror as his mind desperately tried to calculate the massive legal nightmare he had just accidentally confessed to on the official court record. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the solid wood of the podium. When you realized you could not physically transfer the $41 million out of the mirrored dummy account right away, you panicked. You needed physical cash immediately to pay Judge Hayes and secure Brandon and Simone's loyalty with that luxury yacht. So you went to a secondary high-risk commercial lender. You took out massive short-term bridge loans and a heavy second mortgage on our primary residence. But to get immediate approval for those massive loans, you had to prove you had the collateral to back them up. Jason let out a low, agonizing groan, covering his sweaty face with his trembling hands. He knew exactly what I was about to say next. You submitted the fake financial statements from the mirrored account I created. I continued, my voice echoing relentlessly through the silent courtroom. You presented those digital ghosts to a federally insured commercial bank as proof of your net worth. You signed federal loan applications claiming you had direct access to a $41 million medical technology buyout fund. And because the bank legally required both spouses to sign off on a second mortgage, you forged my signature on every single document they handed you. In the front row, Simone let out another piercing, hysterical shriek. She grabbed Brandon by the collar of his tailored suit, shaking his shoulders violently. "Tell me your name is not on that yacht paperwork, Brandon," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated panic. "Tell me you did not sign those loan documents with him." Brandon just stared blankly ahead, his face completely ashen. He had signed the paperwork. Jason had convinced him it was a completely foolproof plan to drastically upgrade their lifestyle using my money. They were both legally bound to millions of dollars in highly illegal, fraudulent commercial loans. I turned my attention completely back to my husband. "You thought you were so clever, Jason. You thought you were executing a flawless financial drain of my personal accounts before I could stop you. But you actually took out massive fraudulent loans using my forged signature against an estate that absolutely no longer exists. I do not own that money. You do not own that money. You borrowed millions of dollars against thin air." I paused, letting the absolute suffocating silence of the courtroom amplify my next words. I made sure my articulation was perfectly crisp, so every single syllable would be permanently recorded by the terrified court reporter sitting just a few feet away. Buying a 90-foot yacht and bribing a sitting family court judge with non-existent collateral is not just messy local divorce drama, Jason, I said, staring right into his defeated eyes. It is federal wire fraud. It is bank fraud. It is a direct criminal violation of federal statutes carrying a mandatory 25-year prison sentence. The sheer gravity of those words hit the courtroom like an explosive shockwave. Up on the bench, Judge Madeline Hayes let out a pathetic whimpering sound. She had accepted a duffel bag full of illegally obtained cash from a massive federal bank fraud scheme, making her an active co-conspirator in a federal crime. Her entire career was not just over. Her life as a free, wealthy woman was completely finished. Jason slowly lowered his shaking hands from his face. He looked at me with an expression of complete and utter devastation. The arrogant, manipulative narcissist who had violently tried to lock me in a psychiatric ward was completely gone. In his place sat a broken, terrified man who finally realized he had built his own perfect, inescapable prison cell. "You set me up," Jason whispered, his voice barely audible over the low hum of the courtroom air conditioning. "You knew I would try to take the money and you laid a trap." "I did not lay a trap for a good man, Jason," I replied coldly. "I simply built a secure digital wall to protect my son and my life's work. You are the one who decided to scale that wall using forged signatures, bribed officials, and severe child abuse. You chose to commit every single crime of your own free will. I just made sure the cameras were rolling when you did it." Harrison stepped up beside me, closing his leather briefcase with absolute, unyielding finality. "Your Honor," Harrison announced, looking up. Harrison stepped up beside me, closing his leather briefcase with absolute unyielding finality. "Your Honor," Harrison announced, looking up, "I believe my client perfectly defined federal wire fraud." The word hung in the air for less than a second before the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom exploded inward. The heavy brass handles smashed against the interior walls with a deafening crash that echoed like thunder. A dozen men wearing dark tactical vests with the bright yellow letters FBI emblazoned across their chests swarmed into the aisles. They moved with terrifying precision, fanning out across the back rows and blocking every exit in the chamber. Nobody moved a single muscle. A commanding voice roared over the chaos. Special Agent Carter walked straight down the center aisle. He wore a tactical windbreaker and rested his hand firmly on his duty belt. His eyes swept across the paralyzed room, assessing every threat before locking onto the wooden bench. The local county bailiffs who had been guarding the doors just moments ago immediately took their hands off their weapons and stepped backward. They recognized instantly they were completely outranked, and this courtroom was now an active federal crime scene. "Lock down the entire building," Carter barked over his shoulder to his tactical team. "Nobody leaves this room. Nobody touches a cell phone. Nobody attempts to delete a single digital file. If anyone makes a sudden movement, put them on the ground." The raid sent the gallery into absolute shock. People froze in their seats, terrified to breathe. Up on the bench, Judge Madeline Hayes tried to stand up. She tried to summon whatever shred of authority she had left, but her knees buckled. She gripped the edge of her wooden desk, her face completely drained of blood. "You have no jurisdiction here," Judge Hayes stammered, her voice weak. "This is a county courthouse. I am the presiding judge. I demand you leave my chamber immediately." Special Agent Carter stopped right in front of the wooden gate, separating the gallery from the court floor. He looked up at her with a lethal expression of absolute disgust. "You do not have a chamber anymore, Madeline," Carter said, his voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "You are not a judge anymore. You are the primary suspect in a massive federal corruption investigation. We have warrants for your arrest. We have warrants to seize your bank accounts, your phone, and your vehicle. We have the video of you accepting a duffel bag full of illegal cash from the petitioner, and we have the digital trail of the fraudulent loans used to fund that bribe. Your courtroom is officially under federal jurisdiction." Judge Hayes let out a pathetic whimpering sound and collapsed back into her high leather chair, burying her face in her hands. The absolute reality of her situation had finally crushed her. She was going to federal prison and she knew it. Carter turned his attention away from the bench and looked directly at Jason. My husband was still sitting in the witness box, entirely paralyzed by fear. His eyes were wide and manic, darting wildly between the armed federal agents blocking the exits. He looked like a trapped animal searching for a way out that did not exist. Jason slowly stood up, raising his hands in a frantic gesture of surrender. "Wait," Jason screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. "You do not understand. I can explain everything. She manipulated me. I was just trying to protect my son." "Save your breath, Jason." Carter interrupted, stepping through the wooden gate and walking directly toward the witness box. "We already reviewed the hidden camera footage of you physically threatening a 9-year-old boy and forcing heavy sedatives down his throat. We reviewed the fraudulent loan applications you signed using your wife's forged signature. We have you dead to rights on federal wire fraud, bank fraud, child endangerment, and judicial bribery." Two heavily armed federal agents quickly stepped up beside Special Agent Carter, pulling heavy steel handcuffs from their thick tactical belts. Jason stumbled backward against the wooden railing of the witness box, completely out of options. He looked over at me, his eyes begging for a mercy he absolutely did not deserve. He wanted me to call off the raid. He wanted me to save him from the monstrous reality he had built for himself. I stood next to Harrison, completely motionless, and looked back at Jason with cold, absolute indifference. I did not say a single word. I had spent the last 2 months watching him systematically torture my son and plot my destruction. Now I was going to stand right here and silently watch the federal government systematically strip away every single ounce of his pathetic freedom. The absolute silence of the room was shattered by a sudden, desperate burst of movement. Jason realized with horrifying clarity that his manipulation tactics were entirely useless against me and the armed federal agents surrounding him. The primal instinct of a cornered coward completely took over his rational thoughts. He violently shoved his empty wooden chair backward, sending it crashing loudly against the mahogany paneling of the witness box. He leaped over the low, swinging gate of the stand and sprinted toward the narrow side exit, usually reserved for the administrative court staff. He did not even make it 3 steps. The federal agents had been heavily anticipating his exact flight response. 2 massive tactical officers moved with terrifying speed, intercepting him before he could even reach the heavy wooden door. The first agent grabbed Jason by the collar of his expensive tailored suit, while the second agent swept his legs entirely out from under him. Jason let out a sharp, breathless yelp as his body slammed violently onto the polished marble floor. The sickening thud of his physical impact echoed through the chamber. "Stop resisting, and put your hands behind your back right now," the larger agent ordered, pressing his heavy tactical knee directly into the center of Jason's spine. Jason thrashed wildly against the cold marble floor, acting exactly like a spoiled child throwing a violent physical tantrum. He tried to pull his arms away, but the highly trained agents easily overpowered his pathetic, uncoordinated struggle. They wrenched his arms firmly behind his back. The cold, heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists sounded like the absolute final judgment on his entire life. The exact second the steel locked into place, a profound psychological shift occurred in the room. The arrogant, manipulative mastermind completely vanished. His entire narcissistic facade crumbled into millions of irreparable pieces right there on the courtroom floor. Jason stopped his physical thrashing and began to openly weep. It was not a quiet, dignified cry. It was a loud, ugly, hysterical sobbing that completely stripped him of any remaining shred of masculine dignity. He was visibly gasping for air with tears and saliva streaming down his face as the federal agents hauled him roughly up to his knees. "Please, you have to listen to me," Jason wailed, staring frantically up at Special Agent Carter. "I did not do this alone. It was not my idea." He violently twisted his upper body, pointing his chained hands toward the front row of the gallery where his family was sitting. "Brandon made me do it," Jason screamed, his voice cracking with pure, desperate betrayal. "Brandon is the one who found the high-risk commercial lenders. He is the one who showed me exactly how to forge the digital signatures. He said we desperately needed the money to secure our future. And Simone demanded that massive luxury yacht. She said she would call the police and tell them everything if I did not buy it for her. They forced me into this massive conspiracy. They are the real criminal masterminds here." A collective gasp of absolute disgust swept through the entire gallery. Even the seasoned federal agents looked down at him with clear, undeniable revulsion. Jason was actively throwing his own flesh and blood directly under the federal bus, desperately hoping to shave a few years off his mandatory prison sentence. In the front row, Brandon stood up, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He looked at the brother he had blindly supported, and his expression turned from pure fear to absolute hatred. "You miserable, pathetic coward!" Brandon shouted, his voice shaking with intense fury. "I trusted you with my life." The federal agents hauled Jason completely to his feet, grabbing him tightly by his upper biceps. As they began to drag his limp body toward the center aisle, Jason locked his tear-filled red eyes directly onto me. He started dragging his expensive leather shoes against the floor, desperately trying to stall his inevitable exit from the room. "Natalie, please." Jason begged, his voice pathetic and incredibly weak. "I am deeply sick. You know I am sick. I have a severe sickness in my mind and I need immediate medical help. Do not let them take me to a maximum security federal prison. I will absolutely not survive in there. I am the father of your only child, Natalie. We deeply loved each other once. Please just tell them to let me go right now. I will give you anything you want. I will sign any legal document you put in front of me." Just please show me some basic human mercy. I stood perfectly still, letting his pathetic, desperate pleas wash over me without feeling a single ounce of genuine sympathy. I looked at the man who had actively poisoned my healthy 9-year-old son for months. I looked at the monster who had successfully bribed a judge to permanently strip me of my basic human rights. I walked slowly to the edge of the wooden partition, stopping just 2 feet away from his trembling, sweaty face. I looked him dead in his panicked eyes, making sure my absolute final words to him would haunt his thoughts for the next 25 years of his miserable existence. You wanted me locked up. Locked? I said, my voice ice cold and perfectly steady. Enjoy your cell. As the federal agents hauled Jason's sobbing frame down the center aisle and out the heavy mahogany doors, the suffocating tension in the courtroom sharply pivoted toward the front row of the gallery. Simone was trembling violently. The reality of Jason's confession about the fraudulent loans had finally registered in her panicked mind. She was not just losing a luxury yacht. She was actively wearing a major felony around her neck. Her manicured fingers reached up to her throat, desperately fumbling with the intricate platinum clasp of my grandmother's $150,000 diamond necklace. She knew if she was caught with stolen property, her situation would become completely catastrophic. She managed to undo the tight clasp, dropping the valuable necklace directly onto the polished wooden floor of the pew and covertly sliding her expensive designer heel over it. She was desperately trying to kick it beneath the heavy bench, hiding the physical evidence of her extreme greed. But she was moving too fast and breathing too heavily to go unnoticed. Special Agent Carter pivoted sharply, his intense eyes catching the bright glint of the diamonds hitting the floorboards. "Do not move that foot," Carter barked, his deep voice slicing right through the low murmur of the stunned courtroom. He marched directly toward the low swinging gate, pointing a rigid, authoritative finger straight at Simone. Simone froze completely, her eyes wide with a sickening mixture of terror and fake indignation. "I dropped my jewelry," she stammered, her voice pitching up into a pathetic squeak. "It was just a clumsy accident, I swear." Carter stepped right into the narrow aisle, reached down, and effortlessly pushed her expensive leather shoe aside. He picked up the heavy diamond necklace, holding it up high under the bright fluorescent courtroom lights. "This does not belong to you," Carter stated, his tone absolutely firm and unrelenting. "This is a stolen family heirloom, and based on the direct testimony we just heard, you acquired it through a massive criminal conspiracy funded entirely by federal wire fraud. This is now officially classified as physical evidence of receiving stolen federal funds." Sitting right next to her, Brandon shot up from his wooden seat, raising both of his hands high in a frantic gesture of surrender. "Listen to me," Officer Brandon pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "I had absolutely no idea Jason forged her signature on those bank documents. I swear to God, I thought the money was legally his to spend. I am just an innocent victim in all of this. You absolutely cannot arrest me for simply trusting my brother." Carter looked at Brandon with a stare of absolute, unfiltered disgust. "You willingly signed commercial loan documents leveraging $41 million you never bothered to legally verify," Carter shot back, shutting down his pathetic defense instantly. "You personally hired armed private security mercenaries to facilitate the violent kidnapping of a 9-year-old boy. You are not a victim, Brandon. You are a highly willing co-conspirator who got exceptionally greedy, and now you are going to pay the ultimate price. Cuff them both right now." The tactical agents moved in swiftly without any hesitation. Simone let out a sudden blood-curdling shriek as a massive agent grabbed her arms violently, twisting them behind her back. "Get your hands off me," she screamed, her designer dress riding up as she thrashed aggressively against the hard wooden pew. "I am a respectable, wealthy woman. You absolutely cannot do this to me." The agent completely ignored her hysterical protests, forcing her wrists together as the cold, heavy steel handcuffs clicked securely around them. A second tactical agent grabbed Brandon, shoving him roughly against the back of the wooden bench to secure his struggling hands. "You have the right to remain silent." The agent began loudly reciting their Miranda rights over the ensuing chaotic noise of the room. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As they were forcefully yanked to their feet, their supposedly unbreakable united front completely shattered. Simone turned her furious, tear-streaked face toward Brandon. "This is entirely your fault," she shrieked, spitting the harsh words directly at her husband. "You said this plan was completely foolproof. You said we were going to be filthy rich. I am going to a federal prison because you are a stupid, gullible failure." Brandon yanked his shoulder hard against the federal agent's tight grip, glaring viciously back at his wife. "You are the greedy one who demanded that massive yacht," he roared back, his face turning a dark crimson. "You drove us completely into bankruptcy trying to live like a billionaire when you had absolutely nothing." They continued screaming highly vicious personal insults at each other, airing every toxic grievance of their failed marriage. The federal agents physically dragged them up the center aisle, their expensive luxury shoes scuffing harshly against the polished marble floors. They looked utterly pathetic, completely stripped of their fake wealth, their stolen jewelry, and their arrogant superiority. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind Brandon and Simone, cutting off their toxic screaming. The courtroom fell back into a heavy, suffocating silence. Only two people were left to face the absolute reality of the federal raid: myself and Honorable Madeline Hayes. Special Agent Carter slowly turned his back to the center aisle and faced the elevated wooden bench. The rhythmic sound of his heavy, tactical boots striking the marble floor echoed loudly as he closed the distance between the gallery and the judge. The local county bailiffs who had previously taken orders from the bench now stood entirely frozen, simply watching the federal takeover. Up on the bench, Madeline Hayes was desperately trying to reconstruct her shattered authority. She sat up straight, adjusting the collar of her black judicial robe and clearing her throat. She looked down at Carter, attempting to project an aura of absolute legal supremacy, but her trembling hands gave her away entirely. "You are making a catastrophic mistake, Agent Carter," she said, her voice shaking but laced with pure, arrogant venom. "I am a sitting judicial officer in this county. I have absolute judicial immunity from prosecution regarding any and all administrative decisions made from this bench. If you attempt to arrest me for signing a conservatorship order, I will have your federal badge by the end of the day. I will sue the federal government for gross overreach, and I will see you, personally, destroyed." Special Agent Carter stopped at the base of the wooden steps leading up to the bench. He did not look intimidated in the slightest. He looked at her with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity, mixed with intense disgust. "Judicial immunity protects judges who make honest legal errors in the faithful execution of their duties," Carter stated, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the silent room. "It absolutely does not protect a judge who accepts a heavy canvas duffel bag filled with illegally obtained cash in exchange for signing fraudulent ex parte orders. You did not make a legal error, Madeline. You engaged in a premeditated criminal conspiracy, federal bribery, and extortion. You actively plotted to destroy a healthy child for financial gain." Judge Hayes opened her mouth to argue, but Carter raised his hand sharply, cutting her off completely. "The State Judicial Board has already been notified of your immediate federal indictment." Carter continued, his tone entirely devoid of sympathy. "The local police chief, who usually covers up your minor indiscretions, cannot save you from a federal wire fraud charge. Your assets are currently being seized by the Treasury Department. You are completely out of options. Now stand up." Judge Hayes remained frozen in her high-backed leather chair, staring at him in sheer disbelief. She had spent years ruling over this courtroom with an iron fist, destroying families with a single strike of her wooden gavel. She could not comprehend that her absolute power had just evaporated into thin air. "I said stand up!" Carter roared, his voice echoing like thunder, causing the remaining local bailiffs to physically flinch. Madeline Hayes slowly pushed herself up from her chair, her legs trembling so violently she had to grip the edge of the heavy wooden desk just to stay upright. "Take off the robe," Carter ordered, pointing directly at her. Judge Hayes gasped, her eyes widening in profound humiliation. "You cannot do this," she whispered, her voice cracking as genuine tears finally formed in her eyes. "Please do not do this in front of my own court staff. I am begging you to handle this privately in my chambers. You dragged an innocent mother into this courtroom intending to permanently strip her of her child and her entire estate using forged documents." Carter replied, his voice ice cold. "You tried to execute a public humiliation against my witness. You completely desecrated the authority of that robe the second you brought it into my suspect's bedroom to accept a bribe. Take it off right now, or my agents will step up there and physically remove it for you." The threat of physical force finally broke her entirely. With shaking hands, Madeline Hayes reached up and unzipped the front of her solemn black judicial robe. She slipped it slowly off her shoulders, letting the heavy, dark fabric pool onto the floor behind her desk like a discarded rag. Stripped of her official uniform, she was wearing a bright, expensive designer dress. She suddenly looked incredibly small and entirely ordinary. She was no longer an untouchable legal authority dictating the fates of others. She was just a corrupt, greedy woman caught in a massive federal sting. Carter walked up the short wooden steps, stepping directly behind the bench. He grabbed her wrists, pulling them firmly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around the wrists of a sitting judge was the single most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Madeline Hayes bowed her head, her blonde hair falling forward to hide her face, crying tears of absolute shame. Carter grabbed her firmly by the arm, leading her out from behind the heavy wooden desk and walking her slowly down the steps. They walked past the empty witness box where Jason had sat just moments ago and past the defense table. As she walked past me, I did not say a single word. I simply watched the woman who tried to play God with my life take her final humiliating walk of shame. In one swift, brilliant motion, Agent Carter had permanently ended her corrupt career and her freedom. The lion's den was completely dismantled. The monsters were all in chains. Now, it was finally time to reclaim my life. 6 months passed since that explosive morning in courtroom number 4. The media circus surrounding the case had been absolutely relentless, capturing national headlines for weeks. But I watched the entire fallout from the complete safety of my new, heavily secured private estate, far away from the toxic suburbs I had left behind. I sat on my plush living room sofa holding a warm ceramic mug of tea and pointed the remote at the massive flat-screen television. The morning news anchor looked directly into the camera, her expression serious and highly professional. "Good morning," she announced, her voice filling my quiet living room. "We begin today with the stunning conclusion to the massive federal corruption and wire fraud trial that has completely rocked our state legal community." The television screen flashed to a high-resolution photograph of Jason. He was not wearing his expensive tailored suits anymore. He was wearing a drab, oversized orange jumpsuit, his hands heavily shackled to a thick metal waist chain. He looked aged, entirely pale, and profoundly broken. The news anchor detailed how Jason had completely collapsed during his final federal sentencing hearing. The presiding federal judge had read the horrific details of the child abuse and the calculated psychological torture he inflicted on our son. The judge showed absolutely zero leniency, declaring Jason a severe danger to society and a remorseless manipulator. Jason was handed a mandatory 25-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary entirely without the possibility of parole. He had sobbed uncontrollably, begging the federal judge for mercy, just as he had begged me, but his tears earned him nothing but a harsh reprimand from the bench. The man who had terrorized his own family for money was now just an inmate number locked inside a suffocating concrete box for the next quarter of a century. The broadcast smoothly shifted to the fate of former Honorable Madeline Hayes. The anchor explained that her desperate attempts to secure a quiet plea deal had been immediately rejected by Special Agent Carter and his aggressive corruption task force. They wanted to make a highly visible public example out of her. She was sentenced to 15 years in a high-security federal women's correctional facility. Furthermore, she was permanently disbarred, stripped of her lucrative government pension, and ordered to pay massive federal restitution. The woman who had previously used her heavy black judicial robe as an untouchable shield for extortion was now wearing standard-issue prison cotton, sleeping on a thin metal cot, completely stripped of her dignity and her freedom. But the most deeply satisfying segment of the morning news broadcast was entirely reserved for Brandon and Simone. The investigative reporter stood on a sunny marina dock, pointing out at the sparkling blue water. Moored in the background was the massive 90-foot luxury yacht they had so arrogantly purchased. A large bright yellow federal seizure notice was plastered aggressively across the tinted glass doors of the vessel. The reporter explained that the federal government had instantly repossessed the yacht and frozen every single financial asset tied to Brandon and Simone. Because their signatures were permanently attached to the fraudulent commercial loans, they were forced into immediate catastrophic bankruptcy. The news channels showed a brief clip of the dingy, rundown apartment building where the couple was currently forced to live while awaiting their own federal criminal conspiracy trials. It was a cramped one-room studio located right next to a noisy industrial train yard in the worst part of the city. Simone had been forced to aggressively liquidate every single piece of her designer clothing, her expensive leather handbags, and her imported luxury vehicles just to afford a bottom-tier defense attorney. The arrogant woman who had stood on her sprawling, expensive patio drinking vintage champagne and proudly wearing my stolen family diamonds was now trying to survive in a cramped, roach-infested room, constantly complaining about the lack of reliable hot water. Brandon was reportedly working the graveyard shift at a local fast food drive-thru just to pay their basic utility bills. His former arrogant superiority was completely crushed under the crushing weight of massive federal debt and the terrifying reality of his impending prison time. Neighbors reported that the couple spent every single night screaming vicious insults at each other through the thin drywall, blaming one another for their absolute total destruction. They had lost their friends, their social standing, and their sanity. Every single person they had previously bragged to about their newfound wealth had completely abandoned them the second the federal indictments were unsealed. They had tried to steal an empire that did not belong to them, and in the process they had completely annihilated their own lives. I pressed the power button on the remote, turning the television screen completely black. The monsters were finally locked away exactly where they belonged, and my tea was still perfectly warm. I set my ceramic mug down on the glass coffee table and closed my eyes, letting the quiet peace of my new life wash over me. When I opened them again, the memory of that cold gray city faded completely, replaced by the brilliant, blinding sunshine of the Malibu coastline. I was sitting in a low canvas beach chair, digging my bare toes into the warm, golden sand. The rhythmic crashing of the Pacific Ocean waves provided a constant soothing soundtrack to our afternoon. I took a deep breath of the salty ocean air, feeling a profound sense of absolute freedom that I had never experienced before. I looked down the pristine shoreline and smiled. Just a few yards away, right where the clear blue water met the wet sand, was Leo. He was not the pale, trembling boy forced to swallow heavy sedatives in a dark, locked bedroom. He was vibrantly alive. His skin was tanned from weeks of playing in the California sun, and he was laughing loudly as a small wave rushed up to tickle his ankles. He was furiously digging with a bright plastic shovel, constructing a massive, elaborate sandcastle with tall, uneven towers and a deep defensive moat. Watching him run back and forth carrying buckets of ocean water, my heart swelled with an overwhelming mixture of pride and profound relief. He was completely healthy. He was thriving. The dark, suffocating shadow Jason had cast over his childhood was entirely gone, erased by the bright light of our new reality. As I sat there watching my son build his fortress, my cell phone vibrated violently against the plastic armrest of my beach chair. I picked up the sleek device and glanced at the bright screen. The caller identification displayed a long string of numbers followed by an automated text alert. It was an incoming collect call originating from a high-security federal penitentiary facility located 2,000 miles away. Jason. It had been 6 months, and this was his first desperate attempt to reach out from behind the cold concrete walls of his permanent new home. He probably wanted to cry and beg for an appeal, or try to manipulate me into sending him commissary money. He probably thought he still had some invisible emotional hold over my conscience. I stared at the blinking green accept button and felt absolutely nothing. There was no anger left in my body. There was no residual sadness. There was only a cold, absolute indifference. I did not even entertain the thought of hearing his pathetic, manipulative voice for a single second. I pressed my thumb firmly against the red reject button, instantly severing the connection. Then I opened the phone settings and permanently blocked the federal facility's outgoing routing number. Jason was a miserable ghost from a dead past, and I was completely finished letting ghosts haunt my beautiful present. I tossed the phone back into my canvas beach tote and leaned my head back against the chair, letting the warm sun heat my face. If this entire terrifying nightmare has taught me anything, it is the absolute uncompromising power of female financial independence. Society constantly tells women to be accommodating, to shrink ourselves down, so we do not intimidate the men around us. We are taught to share everything unconditionally and trust blindly. But financial independence is not just about buying luxury houses or expensive clothes. It is absolute unbreakable armor. My ability to quietly build a corporate empire and secure those assets in an irrevocable trust was the only thing that stood between my physical freedom and a locked psychiatric ward. Money gave me the power to fight a corrupt judicial system and completely crush the monsters who tried to destroy my child. Never apologize for your ambition, and never let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting exactly what you have built. We are also conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, that we must forgive and endure endless toxic behavior simply because we share a last name or a legal marriage certificate. That is a highly dangerous lie. You have to learn how to set absolutely ruthless boundaries. When people show you they are willing to betray you for their own selfish greed, you must believe them the very first time. Cutting off Jason, Brandon, and Simone was not an act of cruelty. It was an act of profound, necessary self-preservation. You owe absolutely nothing to people who view your success as a resource to be exploited and stolen. But above all else, Jason made the most fatal miscalculation a predator can ever make. He thought my deep love for Leo made me vulnerable. He thought my maternal desperation would make me weak, confused, and easy to manipulate. He did not realize that a mother's love is not just soft, nurturing, and gentle. When our children are actively threatened, a mother's love becomes the most dangerous, lethal weapon on the face of the earth. We will tear down corrupt systems, we will destroy fraudulent empires, and we will burn the entire world to the ground to keep our children safe. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If you have ever had to build a fortress to protect yourself from toxic family members, or if you have ever used your own success to break free from a manipulator, I want to hear your story. Please leave a comment below telling me exactly how you reclaimed your power. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of resilient strength and absolute justice. Remember to always guard your peace, protect your hard-earned assets, and never ever underestimate your own fierce strength. Until next time, stay safe and keep building your empire. The story of Natalie and her ruthless battle against her manipulative husband Jason offers a profound lesson on the absolute necessity of financial independence and proactive self-protection. In our society, women are frequently conditioned to be accommodating, to share their resources unconditionally, and to blindly trust those who hold the title of family or spouse. However, Natalie's terrifying ordeal shatters this dangerous illusion completely. When Jason weaponized the legal and medical systems to steal her massive life's work and endanger their healthy 9-year-old son, it was not tears or emotional appeals to his morality that saved her. It was her sharp intellect and her uncompromising financial boundaries. The core takeaway from this devastating yet triumphant saga is that personal success and financial autonomy are not just markers of achievement. They are your ultimate armor against exploitation. By secretly moving her wealth into an irrevocable trust the exact moment she sensed betrayal, Natalie neutralized the very weapon her husband intended to use against her. She proved that hoping for the best is never a reliable substitute for legally preparing for the worst. Her journey teaches us that setting firm legally binding boundaries is not an act of malice, but an act of profound self-love and maternal protection. We must clearly recognize that toxic individuals will actively use our empathy, our love, and our biological ties as leverage to drain our resources and our spirit. True empowerment comes from recognizing our own worth and refusing to let anyone, regardless of their relation to us, treat our hard-earned success as their personal entitlement. We must always be the fiercely protective architects of our own absolute security. Take a close look at your own financial boundaries today and take concrete steps to legally protect everything you have worked so hard to build.